The Dallas Cowboys are about to do something they haven't done in a very long time. Build with a plan. Not a reaction. Not a panic move. Not Jerry Jones winging it at the podium after a first-round exit. An actual deliberate structural plan for how this franchise is going to reload, retool, and reclaim its place among the elite organizations in professional football. And the man behind that plan is first-year head coach Brian Schottenheimer, who has quietly been laying the groundwork for one of the most calculated draft approaches this organization has seen in years. We're talking about the 2026 NFL Draft, what it means for the Cowboys roster, which positions are being targeted, how the scouting process is being overhauled, and why all of it, taken together, could represent a genuine turning point for a franchise that has been spinning its wheels for far too long. If you bleed navy and silver, pay close attention, subscribe, and hit the notification bell, because this is the conversation that matters most right now in Dallas. Let's start from the moment Brian Schottenheimer got the job, because the reaction was telling. When Jerry Jones announced that he was elevating the offensive coordinator to head coach, the fan base fractured almost immediately. One side saw it as a smart, continuity-driven decision. Schottenheimer had already built genuine trust and credibility inside that locker room. The players respected him. The staff knew him. He had demonstrated real competence as a play caller and offensive architect, and there was a legitimate argument to be made that keeping the core structure intact while upgrading the leadership layer was the right move for a team that was already talented enough to compete. The other side saw it as the same old Cowboys. Jerry Jones protecting his own comfort zone, promoting from within because it was easier than doing the hard work of going out and recruiting a transformational outside hire. Both perspectives had merit. But here's what neither side fully anticipated. Schottenheimer was not going to walk through that door and simply maintain the status quo. From the very first weeks of his tenure as head coach, there have been signs, unmistakable signs, that he arrived with an agenda. And nowhere is that agenda more visible than in how this organization is preparing for the 2026 NFL Draft. According to multiple reports and the substance of what Schottenheimer himself has communicated in press conferences and interviews, the Cowboys are already deep into the preparation process for a draft that is still well over a year away. And before you dismiss that as standard operating procedure, understand that the depth of this preparation is not standard. This is not your typical pre-draft scouting cycle, where the personnel department starts pulling film in the fall and the front office makes decisions in April. What Schottenheimer appears to be building is a fully integrated top-to-bottom evaluation system where the coaching staff, the scouts, and the front office are all operating from the same blueprint. The philosophy driving it is not just about finding talented players. It is about finding the right players for a very specific vision of what the Dallas Cowboys need to become over the next 3 to 5 years. That distinction matters enormously, and it represents a meaningful departure from how this organization has historically operated. So what does that vision look like? What are the actual positions and priorities that Schottenheimer and his staff have identified as the foundation of this draft approach? Let's go position by position, because each one tells a piece of a larger story. Start with the offensive line, because everything in the NFL flows from the trenches, and the Cowboys have been losing that battle for several years running. There was a time, not even that long ago, when the Dallas offensive line was considered the gold standard of the NFL. That era is over. Tyron Smith, one of the most dominant left tackles of his generation, is gone. Travis Frederick's retirement created a void at center that the organization never truly filled. And the interior of the line has cycled through a rotating cast of players who have shown flashes but never established themselves as the kind of foundational pieces you can build around for a decade. The result has been an offense that struggles to protect the quarterback on passing downs and fails to establish the physical, ground-and-pound identity that Schottenheimer has repeatedly said he wants this team to have. He has been remarkably clear in his public comments about this. He wants to be able to run the football. He wants to control the line of scrimmage. He wants the Cowboys to be the team that physically imposes its will on opponents in the fourth quarter when games are decided. None of that happens without elite offensive linemen, and Schottenheimer knows it. The 2026 draft class is already being evaluated through that lens, with the Cowboys reportedly sending scouts to watch top offensive line prospects on a regular basis, well in advance of the typical scouting calendar. Whether that ends up meaning a tackle, a guard, a center, or some combination thereof will depend on how the current roster evolves, but the commitment to addressing the offensive line through this draft is real, and it is a priority. Now shift to the defensive side of the ball, and the needs become just as pressing. The Cowboys' defense has had its moments in recent years, largely because of what Micah Parsons does on a weekly basis. Parsons is a generational talent, a disruptive force who can wreck a game plan all by himself, and his presence has masked some real structural deficiencies in how this defense is constructed. The pass rush beyond Parsons has been a persistent concern. When opposing offenses can game plan specifically to take away one player and feel reasonably confident that the rest of the defensive front will not beat them, that is a problem. Schottenheimer and his defensive coaching staff appear acutely aware of this. The emphasis on finding complementary edge rushers who can take pressure off Parsons and give his defense multiple threats on the outside is central to the 2026 draft vision. The 2026 college class is shaping up to have genuine talent at the edge rusher and defensive tackle positions, and the Cowboys are reportedly monitoring that group closely. Building a pass rush that is not entirely dependent on one player is not just a depth move. It is a philosophical commitment to being a defense that can sustain pressure over the course of a full season and into a playoff run. And then there is the secondary, which has been the most glaring and persistent weakness on this roster for an uncomfortably long stretch of time. This is not a new problem. Cowboys fans have been watching opposing receivers carve up the back end of this defense for years. Big plays in coverage, missed assignments, insufficient turnover production, an inability to close out games when the defense needs a stop most. Schottenheimer has been direct about wanting to fix this. He has spoken about the importance of having a secondary that can play man coverage, compete on the outside, and create turnovers consistently. The Cowboys scouting department is already doing extensive research on the top cornerback and safety prospects in the 2026 class, and this level of advanced investment tells you everything you need to know about how seriously the organization is taking this need. When teams scout a draft class more than a year in advance with this kind of intentionality, it reflects genuine organizational alignment around a priority. The Cowboys clearly believe the secondary has to be rebuilt, and they appear committed to using draft capital to do it. But here is where Schottenheimer's approach gets even more interesting, because it is not just about which positions are being targeted. It is about how the Cowboys are evaluating the players at those positions. One of the long-standing criticisms of the Dallas Cowboys organization under its current structure has been an over-reliance on physical measurables and athletic testing at the expense of less quantifiable but equally important factors like football intelligence, character, and scheme fit. Schottenheimer is reportedly pushing hard for a more holistic evaluation model, one that treats a player's mental processing speed, his ability to absorb a playbook, his leadership qualities within a locker room, and his competitive makeup as genuinely important inputs in the grading process rather than footnotes on a scouting report. This is not a small adjustment. It is a philosophical renovation of how the Cowboys decide which players are worth investing in, and over time, the cumulative impact of consistently drafting high-character, high football IQ players who fit the specific demands of the system can be transformative for an organization's culture and competitive identity. There's also significant buzz around a potential shift in how the Cowboys approach the draft from a pure strategy standpoint. Specifically, there are indications that Schottenheimer is open to the idea of trading down in the draft to accumulate additional picks, particularly in the second and third rounds where teams can find tremendous value if they have done their homework. This would represent a meaningful philosophical departure from the Jerry Jones approach, which has historically leaned toward the marquee first-round selection, the guy with the name and a highlight reel who generates excitement and conversation. Schottenheimer apparently sees it differently. He reportedly believes that depth of talent across a draft class is more valuable than a single high-profile pick, particularly when the team has multiple positions of need and when the second and third round players you identify are ones you are genuinely confident in. The organizations that have used this strategy most effectively, the Philadelphia Eagles and the Baltimore Ravens come to mind immediately, have built some of the most consistently competitive rosters in the NFL over the past decade. They have more bites at the apple, more opportunities to find contributors, and more flexibility to take calculated risks on players with upside. If the Cowboys can adopt and execute this approach, it would address one of the most persistent complaints about how this franchise drafts. You cannot discuss the Cowboys' draft plans without at least acknowledging the quarterback situation, even if it is one that comes loaded with complexity and sensitivity. Dak Prescott's future with this organization has been a topic of ongoing debate for what feels like the entirety of his tenure. Schottenheimer has publicly and consistently expressed his support for Prescott and his commitment to building the offense around him. And there is no credible indication right now that the Cowboys are planning to use this draft to find his replacement. But smart organizations do not wait until a situation becomes a crisis to start doing their homework. The Cowboys scouting department is almost certainly keeping tabs on the top quarterback prospects in the 2026 class, not because there is a plan to move on from Dak, but because that is simply what responsible franchise management looks like. Having information is not the same as having an intention. Every well-run team in the NFL tracks the quarterback market every single year. That is not a story. That is table stakes. One of the more underreported but genuinely impactful elements of Schottenheimer's approach is the structural change he is making in how the coaching staff interfaces with the personnel department during the draft process. This has historically been a source of friction in Dallas. The scouting department grades players, the front office makes the final calls, and the coaches are often left absorbing players who are selected without deep input from the people who will actually have to develop and deploy them on game days. Schottenheimer is tearing down that silo. He is creating a collaborative framework where the position coaches and coordinators have meaningful input into which prospects are targeted, which means that by the time a player is drafted, there's already a detailed developmental plan in place for how he fits into the scheme, where he lines up, how he's going to be used, and what the coaching staff expect from him in year one and beyond. This kind of organizational coherence is something that championship franchises treat as non-negotiable. It is encouraging, genuinely encouraging, to see the Cowboys starting to operate this way. Schottenheimer has also spoken about versatility as a core criterion in how the Cowboys will evaluate draft prospects across all positions. The modern NFL rewards teams that can create positional mismatches and force opposing coordinators to solve multiple problems simultaneously, and the way you build that kind of roster flexibility is by drafting players who are not locked into a single alignment or a single role. For the Cowboys, that might mean targeting defensive linemen who can play both inside and outside, depending on the situation, linebackers who can cover and rush, offensive linemen who can play guard and tackle interchangeably, or defensive backs who are genuinely comfortable at both cornerback and safety. Players like that are not always the ones who generate the loudest pre-draft buzz, but they are invaluable when you're trying to build a functional, adaptable roster rather than a collection of specialists who can only do one thing. There is also a financial dimension to all of this that ties the entire strategy together and makes it not just smart football, but smart business. The Cowboys are carrying significant salary cap obligations attached to their core of established players. Dak Prescott, CeeDee Lamb, and Micah Parsons are all operating on major contracts, and those commitments naturally compress the cap space available to address roster needs through free agency. This is not a unique situation. Almost every team with genuine stars on its roster deals with some version of this tension. But it is a reality that shapes how you have to build, and it is a reality that makes the draft exponentially more important. Rookie contracts are the most cost-effective mechanism for adding talent in professional football. A second-round pick who develops into a starter earns a fraction of what a veteran free agent at the same position would cost. A third-round pick who becomes a key rotational player provides real value at a price point that gives the team flexibility to retain its stars and address needs elsewhere. Schottenheimer understands this, and his emphasis on building through the draft is at least partially rooted in the financial math that every NFL front office has to solve. When you pull all of these threads together, the positional priorities, the philosophical shift in player evaluation, the structural collaboration between coaches and personnel, the potential draft capital accumulation strategy, the emphasis on versatility and scheme fit, the financial logic of building through the draft. What you see is a coherent, integrated vision for how Brian Schottenheimer intends to build the Dallas Cowboys into a championship-caliber organization. This is not the Cowboys chasing headlines. This is not Jerry Jones making impulsive decisions in response to public pressure. This is a first-year head coach who walked into one of the most scrutinized jobs in professional sports with a specific set of ideas about how to fix what is broken, and who has moved with striking clarity and deliberateness in laying the groundwork for a genuine organizational overhaul. That does not mean it will work. Planning and execution are entirely different things, and the NFL has a way of humbling organizations that thought they had it all figured out. Draft picks miss. Injuries happen. Circumstances change. The best-laid strategies can fall apart when the evaluations are wrong or the development does not materialize or the scheme does not translate from the drawing board to the field. The Cowboys can have the most sophisticated draft plan in the league and still whiff badly if they do not identify the right players, develop them properly, and put them in a position to succeed. Those risks are real and they are not hypothetical. But here is what is also real. For perhaps the first time in a very long time, the Dallas Cowboys appear to have organizational alignment between the head coach and the broader decision-making structure around what the team needs, how it should be built, and what the process for achieving that looks like. That alignment matters. Teams that operate with coherent internal direction make better decisions at every level, from the draft room to the practice field to game day adjustments. The absence of that coherence has cost the Cowboys dearly over the years, creating an organization that often felt like it was pulling in different directions at once. What Schottenheimer appears to be building is something fundamentally different, a unified philosophy with the 2026 draft as its first major test. The margin between winning and losing in the NFL is brutally thin. A single draft pick can be the difference between a team that breaks through and a team that keeps falling just short. A single developmental success or failure can ripple through a roster for years. The Cowboys have been on the wrong side of that margin for far too long, and the franchise's fans have watched with a mixture of frustration and resigned familiarity as a talented roster has consistently underperformed its potential. What Brian Schottenheimer is doing right now, in these early months of his tenure, is attempting to change the structural conditions that have produced those outcomes. The 2026 draft is not just the next draft on the calendar for this organization. It is the first concrete expression of a new way of operating. And if it goes the way Schottenheimer envisions, it could be the moment that Cowboys fans look back on years from now as the beginning of something real. The foundation is being laid. The plan is in place. Now it is time to watch whether this team can actually build on it.